Hello, good morning. Good morning. I guess in a minute we will start our event today. So let me first introduce myself. I'm Timothy Young, a research fellow at CEPS. Um, you know, Honestly, I look forward to these events. I'm excited, perhaps even nervous. So I really want this event to be successful. So please help me to make it a success. Okay. So let me briefly give you some maybe information about today's event. There will be two panels. The first one will be on the digital democracy from now till 11:30. The second panel is about Ukrainian refugees. And both panels will be supported by democratic reflection. I will explain it to you in a moment. But then both panels are supported or powered by the Horizon Project, Orbis. So Orbis is about deliberative democracy. So the idea is we explore the use of digital tools in deliberation, in democratic discussion. So we take a bottom-up approach. That means we listen to the users, listens to the practitioners to see the needs on the ground, and try to co-create digital solutions to the operation. So conceptually, there are three dimensions that we try to tackle. Number one is trust, how we can make the digital tools trustworthy, how to enhance trust in the tool and also in the democratic process. Number two is literacy. So we need to make sure that the users, the tools are understandable. Users can understand the tool and the in the process. Number three is democracy-centered technology. That means the technology or even the organization, the organizers, respect the basic principles of democracy. So CEPS is involved in this Horizon project, and our Young Thinkers initiative is one of the pilots in this project. I will just briefly tell you, what is Young Thinkers, but then I will not go into the details. In short, we have 55 young thinkers, young people. They joined 6 online sessions, during which they used the Orbis innovations, the digital tools, to facilitate in the discussion, so that we can document their positions, their thoughts, their arguments, and so on. So here it is, one of the platforms, which is called Because. Again, I will not go into the detail, but you can see that, the young people, they just go on to this website and they can put, the positions and also the arguments onto the interface. At the end, we can generate some like summary, some graph that try to link positions, arguments together. And also we can generate, you can say, policy recommendations for that policy area. And then since September 2025, we have common pilots, that is a consortium effort. We try to launch an online multi-stage deliberation. It is still going on. You can check this link. You can still participate in the discussion. So what we did is we use 3 Orbis platforms, the Policy Orbis, Because, and democratic reflection, okay? Try to collect ideas, try to facilitate the operation and so on. If you do have time, check this link after the events, okay? So I just try to summarize the findings from all the pilots, the common pilots and so on. So there's some difficulties, right? Number one is it's not easy to attract participants, okay? And also sometimes they join, it's just not easy to keep up their attention. And also sometimes not easy for us to explain the results because they are kind of generated by the tools, by AI. It's not that easy to do so. And also it is not easy to always maintain the principles of democracy. The reason is we need to make some executive decisions. There's some kind of override the principles, but there are some positives. So we found that it is an easy way to document and to summarize the debate, the deliberation, and so on. And also that the tools will generate insightful analysis that we can use for the moderation or for the discussion of the topic. And also we found that there were more equal, less passive, and more active participation. So there are some ideas for the future. Top down is what we want the policymakers, the institutions to do. So hopefully in the future there will be some large-scale deliberation by authorities. There will be some fundamental changes, institutional changes, at the top level, and also there will be a rise of awareness among the policymakers in the area of democratic deliberation. Bottom up, we found that there's a big potential among the young people. So we would like to have more engagement with the new generations. And also we need more resources. We found that to do this kind of medium-sized deliberation is not easy. It takes resources. And maybe in the future we can set up kind of networks of organizations which are interested in doing this type of in-person or virtual deliberations. Also, that would be great if we can identify those topics which are interesting to those communities and young people. So, okay, I will explain what is democratic reflection. Okay, today we will use kind of a demonstration or like an experiment that we will use this tool so that you can feedback to the speakers. So this is a new type of new way of interactions for this, panel discussion events. Use the QR code, and then you will see, kind of just one question survey. And then after that, you will see some cards. Okay, tell me if you see those cards. I will explain to you how to use them. The logic is so simple that when you listen to the debate, listen to the speakers, you can respond in real time. You can press those cards so that you can express your opinions in real time. So everybody check the QR code. Oh, important. So if you're ready, I will explain to you the cards here. So there are 5 pairs of cards. So you see, the different, you can see different opinions or sentiments. On top, you see, I feel hopeful, I feel worried. And then you see, this is inclusive. This leaves some people out. I agree with this. I see it differently. These are more important. These are more important priorities. These feel urgent. I guess I mean there are more important priorities. Okay, the opposite of this feel urgent. And then these make sense, and this needs more clarity. During the debate, you just tell us your opinions through the cards. At kind of in the mid of the event, we will show you the report. The report will help us to moderate the second half of the debate. Easy, simple. So maybe now I would pass the time to Berta. Berta, she's a brilliant young researcher at CEPS, and she will help us to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tim. And thank you. I'm not going to use the clicker, so there we go. Or maybe I will. Let's see. All right. Hello, everyone. I would like to ask my lovely speakers to come on stage. While they do that, my name is Berta Mige. I'm a researcher here at CEPS. My research, among other things, also focuses on participation in democratic processes. And I have some lovely colleagues at CEPS who have helped me worm my way into this topic of digitalization and AI, hence digital democracy. Our topic today is where is the line between where digital tools help and hinder democratic processes. As you heard, we have a slight bias in the discussion towards deliberation. So I would just like to ask the audience a question. Could you put your hand up if you're familiar with the term deliberation, citizens' assembly, citizens' participation, etc.? Okay, great. Just to make sure we're all on the same page. So why should we even care about this, right? At the moment, there's a lot of private and public money being poured into developing and testing these digital tools. Like Tim said, their proponents say that they can help improve democratic processes, especially in the deliberation area. They say it will help scale up these processes, make them more available to people. It will help with summarizing. It might help with moderating. It will help with consensus finding. But it's a question of whether this is even something that we want. So there are issues of data privacy. There's an issue of the choice architecture of the tools. There's an issue of vendor lock-in, depending on what kind of tools you use. And there's also an issue of techno-solutionalism, which Alvaro Oleart, not to give a shout out to someone first, but has recently written a report on. So there the idea is, are we even asking the right question? Should we not be focusing on how to institutionalize these processes and how to actually make them democratic and think about these principles before embedding them in some sort of digital tool? So with us today, we have 3 speakers. There were 4, but our 4th speaker is unfortunately stuck on a train because of national strikes, which I actually think the Enrico Letta report opened with, we should make the train system in Europe better. So he was right. It's important. We have to get today to start with Gianluca Squel. He is a professor at the Brussels School of Governance at the Center for Digitalization, Democracy and Innovation, and at Sciences Po at their School for Public Affairs. And he has also written a book on designing digital democracy. We have Orsi Nagy. She is a policy analyst at the Joint Research Center at their policy lab with a focus on AI. And we have Paola Zamboni, who works for the European Citizens Action Service and also does activism with youth groups. So she is here today with her 2 hats on. So I'm just going to ask a very quick question from each of you, no nuance. 1 to 5 right now before we launch into our discussion. How pessimistic or optimistic are you about merging tech and democratic innovations and democratic processes? You will be able to give nuance later, which is Gianluca. Let's start with you.
Say I'm 2.5, right in the middle.
Okay. Orsi. I should have specified that these should be real natural numbers, but that's my fault, you know. Paula.
I would say 3 then, so natural number, and yes, then we will elaborate a bit more.
All right, so nothing high, nothing super low. Great. In that case, we are going to get into our first round of discussion. Before we do that, just for the audience, we are going to have 2 rounds of discussion with our panelists. And after that, we will open up to audience discussion. I will attempt to end this panel at 11:20 so that we have a little bit of buffer between this and the next panel so that those of you who are staying for that can take a break, go get a coffee, whatever. Also, I see some seats here in the front. I feel like a teacher. But if you want to hear or see better, please feel free to come forward or take a break at any time. Now, without further ado, Gianluca. As a researcher, and as previously said, an author of a book titled The Design of Digital Democracy, what are your insights into the design of technology in democratic processes? And are there any blind spots that we should know about?
Yeah. By studying participatory processes and the use of technology to make the participation wider and have more citizens engaged, over the years, I came to the conclusion that most of the problems that we see today and we explore today in how citizens engage via digital tools is a problem of design. And in a nutshell, what I think the problem lies is in the expectations that we have as regular users of technologies, commercial technologies, and citizens, so let's say users of digitalized platforms to engage. What are the design features of every technology of commercial use? There's more than one, but I would say three are very important. One is the speed of the service. So the service in every type of technology is delivered as faster as possible. So the moment in which you take action and the moment in which the food that you order on a platform is delivered to you. So this idea that everything that happens with digitalization has to be fast, or at least faster than the analogic world. The second one is simplicity. We say foolproof technology. And I remember both my parents worked at IBM, so my very first computer didn't even have an hard disk. I remember these computers came with thick manuals of instructions. And now if you buy, I would say, I have Apple in mind, but I guess the same is with other computers. You don't even have a manual. The idea is that you turn it on, you use it, you don't have to know anything. No? The third one, it's also a third main feature of design of commercial technology is what we can call singularity. And it's this idea that despite the fact that we have the same technology, the services are tailored on our needs, which in part is true because of the data. So, for example, Google Maps this morning told me the exact way that I will have to walk from where I was to here, depending on the traffic and all the conditions. So that was tailored on me. And the same happens with the algorithm of any platform suggesting or Netflix, no? Netflix or any other platform. You might like this. We know you will love this. And that is the same platform we are possibly all using. However, the results are tailored on my needs. Now, and my point is, most of the narration and the use of digital technologies within the public sector has been tailored on this very type of message. So via digital technology, you're going to have an easy interaction that's going to be very fast. So you as a citizen, you're going to see your opinions delivered in a very fast way. And well, possibly your opinion will be accepted. And this to me is problematic because decision making is necessarily complex, time consuming. And you see these very days when we Europeans are accused almost every day by non-Europeans to be slow, to take too long to make a decision. And well, that's not necessarily related with digitalization, but that expressed the idea that every decision-making process, in particular, democratic decision-making process, is necessarily a little slower than the interactions that we have with commercial products. Now, with that said, this creates a lack of expectations that we have in the technology. And so, in my opinion, that explains why many of the experiments that are run with digital technologies for participation are pretty delusional in the end.
And just before we move on, can I ask you because this was implied, this link between, okay, we have this model of digital technologies and this doesn't work for decision-making because decision-making should be more slow and thoughtful. But can you elaborate on that just a little bit to make it explicit why? Is it not okay if it's fast and tailored and specialized?
Because, okay, let's take an example, which I think it's a very interesting case, the Conference on the Future of Europe, which, because of the time we were living, was run almost exclusively, sorry, on a digital platform, right? Now, you see there, but I think there are a number of problems in this experiment. One of these is the promise behind it. The idea was that by having very smooth interactions on a platform that work pretty well, you will see the future of Europe happening. Now, this is a very powerful promise. This is also a promise on which it's very difficult to deliver. And the other point was, on this platform, we're going to have all Europeans engaged. If you look at the numbers, that's quite interesting. There is a representation of different parts of European society. At the same time, you have the usual suspects participating. So mostly people aged over 45 or 50 years old from some specific countries instead of other countries. So what do you see there? You see that despite the use of a quite efficient technology, the numbers and also the quality of participation was not as good as you might expect. And again, I believe in part, this was due to the miscommunication that was used for this consultation. So this is going to be very easy, and it's going to deliver very soon, which was obviously, I wouldn't say impossible, but very hard to achieve.
An overpromise. Okay, thank you very much. Orsi, as a JRC officer, could you tell us a little bit about how the Policy Lab is approaching this topic? I know that there was a recent foresight exercise on the futures of democracy and AI that had like these different scenarios. So I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of insight from that and from your knowledge about AI.
Yes, thank you. So I come from JRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. So I feel morally obliged to start with a bit of a theoretical framework, but don't worry, it won't take long. So in the study that Berta mentioned, it's a foresight exercise on the future of democracy. Is it? Here. Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. So we use the framework called dialectical waves of change. This is, most of you will know, the old thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So in that sense, we can think of the state of democracy as the thesis and all the challenges that we see from left and right, the antithesis, and the synthesis is to emerge. And what we did in this foresight report is that we didn't use this framework to analyze what has happened, but we use this framework to think about how our future can play out. And we are really at the moment when the thesis and the antithesis are meeting. It's called the zone of indeterminacy. It's a very chaotic zone. You see positive signs. You see that AI can really support participatory democracy. It gives us the tool to engage people, even to convince people, to synthesize responses. But it also leads to fragmentation and manipulation. So we see many contradictory signs at the same time. EU is trying to regulate, but just a few months ago, it started to backtrack on the implementation of the AI Act. Mostly due to industry points and requests. So this is a very confusing moment, but the good thing about this is that change is still possible in all directions. And I think the argument is that this is a moment where regulation is still possible, change is possible, and the new synthesis is still to emerge. In the foresight exercise, we collected a number of signals, emerging trends that point to possible futures. And what we see is that they are really contradictory in terms of participation, in terms of what technology can do. We explored the consequences of these and the consequences of consequences, and we built up 4 scenarios. We built up a scenario in which AI facilitates participatory democracy. We built up a scenario in which citizens are so disappointed with the state of the word democracy and politics that there is a strong citizen pushback and they disengage. There was a scenario of technocratic governance overreach, and there was a scenario of big tech power grab. And we see that technology is not going to solve anything, but it does bring new challenges, and we have to figure that out. And just to close, there was one point that personally really spoke to me in the report, and this was about the grievances. So what emerged very strongly from the report is that, especially in the last years, people have experienced strong economic, cultural, environmental grievances. And it's really hard to go forward and find trust, find common solutions, find compromises if these grievances are not heard and not addressed. And I think just doing it, just exercising the democratic process, the civic muscles, is really important. And it's also a call to listen to very different opinion, and it's also a call to be sensitive when people are expressing grievances, because they don't always come in a very civilized form, but there's a good reason for that.
So is the reason you had a quantum number for me in the beginning because you were thinking about these various futures and like how it could play out?
It's a more practical reason. I facilitated a quantum workshop yesterday, so it was really in my mind. But it is true that quantum physics really gives us some strange and confusing ideas that could be very interesting for how our world works. And this idea that things can be in superposition, that you can hold multiple views, that you can hold multiple thoughts and emotions, and even multiple political views, that only collapse when you cross the vote on the voter's sheet. That's actually quite illuminating if you apply it to the democratic process.
All right, thank you. And Paula, like I said before, you're here wearing two hats. One of your hats is as an activist who works with youth, and digitalization has an obvious generational aspect because there are now generations who have grown up or are growing up using technologies that didn't exist a couple of generations ago. So drawing on this double perspective of working with the European Citizens Action Service and working with youth, could you tell us a little bit about how you see them in particular taking to these digital tools if they've used them?
Yes. These two perspectives are quite puzzling to me at times. Because as a youth activist engaged in different youth-led European organizations, such as the Young European Federalists or the Young European Ambassadors, I would say that we are quite enthusiastic about the opportunity and the possibility to experiment with these new tools of digital democracy. And I would say that 70–80% of what we do happens online, from our campaigns to our surveys, crowdsourcing activities, our meetings, everything happens online. And this is very important for also our deliberative and deliberation process as well. We're also quite happy about participating into petitions that are launched by the European Parliament, the European Citizen Initiative, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, then when I step into my professional role as EU rights coordinator at ECAS, where I research mainly rights of EU citizens, EU mobile citizens, and also these democracy topics, I see a picture that is a bit more complex. And the question that I ask myself the most is a very long one, actually, is how do young people inform themselves? Where do they take the information? And what is the consequences? What are the consequences of this? So just to give you some statistics that I found very interesting. Now I will talk about young people with an age range between 16 and 29 years old living in the EU. So 97% of young people use the internet every day, according to Eurostat. And according to a Eurobarometer service, for 65% of them, social media is their main source of information. At the same time, 76% of young people have reported in the survey being exposed to disinformation in the week before, and 70% of them are confident that they can recognize it. Nevertheless, according to other studies, such as one study on generative AI of the Joint Research Center, 43% of young people do not possess the basic level of digital skills. And according to UNESCO data, only 30% of young people get structured digital education. Which means that young people get the main information online from social media, despite the fact that they lack basic digital skills to be on the media and on the digital space. And this has concrete consequences for democracy. If we think that, as Gianluca was saying, internet is a space that rewards speed, that rewards emotion, that rewards polarization, and a lot of mis and disinformation. So being on this space without the concrete skills, without being capable of searching and absorbing the information has concrete consequences for democracy and for the deliberation process. Which means that according to another report of DG Jest, 1 out of 5 people would be okay with their government being authoritarian. And 10% of young people don't really care whether their government is authoritarian or whether it is a democracy. So for me, this is really something important, and young people must understand and must be given the opportunity to develop these digital skills, to be in the digital space, and to have a really constructive and enriching experience also when it comes to a deliberation process online, I would say.
All right, thank you. It's really interesting. You've almost like flipped what my initial thinking was, because I was coming at it from an idea of people need democratic skills, and maybe I can be convinced if we have those that we can use digital tools to help that. Whereas you've kind of flipped this and say, no, actually, because we're living in this internet soup, we need the digital skills because the digital tools are there to be able to be democratic. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, indeed, because I mean, then as citizens, we slowly develop our democratic skills, being outside, talking to people, and then getting, our information from different sources. But yeah, if we are only online, that's the only thing that we know, and we can't use this, then I think that it's not beneficial for the democratic process as a whole.
All right. Now, I want to ask if any of you, there's been a lot of overlap in what you've said. So I want to give you the opportunity to add a little bit of nuance to what you said before, or to react to any of the other speakers, if you would like. Just let me know with a little hand if you would like to react to the other person. Yeah.
Yes, I found it very interesting what Gianluca was saying about the Conference of Europe, because sometimes, and I've read also in different papers, that digital democracy tools are thought as ways to help with the disengagement of youth. So the fact that when we look at the statistic, young people are the part of the population that votes the least. But at the same time, if we can't keep up with the promises, then this is just going to hurt the participation, and it's going to make the disengagement and the disillusion even harder. So yes, this promise of simplicity, it's a really dangerous one.
All right. In that case, you guys are okay? Great. In that case, I will move on to our second question. And after that, we are going to have the questions round. So keep in mind if you have anything you would like to say or posit or ask. So my second question here for round 2 is, what could happen in the next 1 to 5 years? Let's say that's our timeline. that would sway your opinion, either in favor of using or expanding on using these digital tools in democratic processes, or against using these? Is there anything that could happen that would shift you out of this current number that you're sitting on? Gianluca, please.
Yeah, that actually explains why I was so diplomatic in staying exactly in the middle. When you asked that question, it came to my mind a book that I read recently. A great book is called Power and Progress. It's from Simon Johnson and Daron Acemoglu. I hope I pronounced it correctly, which was awarded a Nobel Prize in economics. And they basically make an exploration historically of how technology has changed society in a better way. And well, I'm oversimplifying, but the main takeover is that every time that a technology has developed in human history, there have been shifts in power, how power is distributed, which usually has led to a more democratic distribution of power. And they conclude with the present moment. They say in this very moment, what you see is, especially with AI, is non-democratic distribution of this technology. However, the potential is there. And that is, starting from the past, what I see for the next few years. I think we are in a moment in which you have a pretty straightforward divide between those who see and apply this technology in an optimistic way. And I'm thinking, speaking of AI, of all the uses of this technology in participatory processes. In Paris, we ran a workshop using a platform called Polis, which it's just one of the many, in which you are helped in aggregating opinions of participants. And all these platforms are promising to deliver a more efficient way of dealing with complex problems. I'm talking of democracy. There are many more potential beneficial uses of this technology. On the other hand, what we are observing in this very moment is quite unique. I think probably for the first time in history, you have a clear opinion from some elites that believe that democracy is opposed to innovation. So in other words, if you want to pursue democracy, you have to give up on innovating at scale, right? And this is, think about the example of the tech citadels that are promoted by a few visionaries, especially from the United States. These are public spaces, but actually private spaces, in which there is just one person in charge, in which the currency is a cryptocurrency. It's all run by AI, and there's no citizens. Is actually shareholders, so investors who get the benefits only because they are taxed less than in democratic states. So in the opposite position, the algorithm or artificial intelligence technology, it's a tool to make states less democratic. And I really believe we are in the between. So I'm not the expert on imagining or thinking strategically about future scenarios. My optimism says that we have a chance to promote the optimistic way, but I really see fair chances for the other conclusion, the pessimistic one.
Yeah, thank you. Just to sprinkle a little bit of context on top of that, there's a lot of big tech companies right now who are doing their own participatory processes and deliberations, where they're trying to reach out to citizens to talk about what should an AI agent look like. Let's do a deliberation on that. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think is really, really dependent also on your view, like you said, Gianluca, about your optimism versus pessimism around this subject.
If I just may add super quickly, there is a quite interesting market behind that of business operators who see a business opportunity. There's nothing wrong in that, of course, but that also tells us something about whether this should be a market or not. Yeah.
Orsi, I have the same question for you. In the next 1 to 5 years, what could happen?
Yes, I really liked how Gianluca started with this more historic perspective. And I think what we see from this historic perspective is indeed technology on the long term has contributed to better lives of people. But what we also see is that after the introduction of the new technology, whether it's the Industrial Revolution, whether we are thinking of even printing books, there was a big dip. There was a dip while the power relations were reshuffling. There was a big dip while people learned to use electricity without burning their houses down. But overall, it increased. But there is a difference between the 1 to 5 shorter term and the historical long term. And they also say that we tend to overestimate technology in the short term and underestimate in the long term. And I do believe that we may be overestimating what AI could do for democracy in the short term, but maybe if we look forward to 15, 20, 30 years, we may actually be underestimating it. And but to answer more precisely to your question, what could shift my thinking is to see a couple of things. I do see that good principles of design, and these are not good principles for engagement, but generally good principles of design are as helpful in any general purpose application as in participatory deliberative tools. So easy access, good explanations, good training materials, security, cybersecurity, GDPR compliance. These are good principles for anything, but also for deliberative platforms. So seeing more of that would definitely give me more hope. I also think that if you think of the role and the vision of large companies, we should invest more in open source and local softwares. And granted, there will be a period, and there may be a very long period, when these will perform maybe less quickly, less smoothly, won't give that user experience. But then again, maybe you don't need a flawless, frictionless user experience when you are deliberating democracy. That's just not in the nature of it. So I do think that more open source would be important. And many of the technologies, whether we talk about synthetic populations or AI acting as or instead of politicians, we already see the signs. They are not widespread. So if you think of the famous Molineux's curve, which is the adoption of the technology and our capacity to regulate it, which really goes in an X, as the technology takes off, our capacity to regulate it will decrease. We are still in the beginning of the curve. So we do have opening to change the course of history, let's say that.
We laugh, but I think that's completely true. It's really interesting to me that in your response, you kind of took for granted the fact that there are going to be digital deliberation tools and digital democracy tools. So this, when you said we should use local open source instead of, maybe having a vendor lock-in with big tech that we don't want, did it occur to you that we could continue to have deliberations without digital tools? So just plain analog, in person.
I think it should be done in parallel, but we already have them, and I cannot see how they would just disappear. So likely they will grow, unlikely they would disappear completely. But then again, there's nothing that replaces face-to-face human discussion and gathering around in a group.
All right. And then Paula, same question, 1 to 5 year time horizon.
Yes, so I think I would become much more positive about the possibility of experiencing with digital democracy tools if we can find solutions to the problems that I have outlined before. And therefore, the first thing that I would like to see is more digital literacy for young people. So digital literacy becoming a crucial part of both formal and non-formal education. And this should also go hand in hand with civic education. So two competencies that should be taught together. Because indeed, when we are in schools and we are taught how to write with a pen, word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, we learn how to structure our way of thinking and how to construct our critical thought. And I think that this new type of writing is indeed the digital tools and the digital space. And so we should not just give these tools without explaining yet to young people how to use them, but there should be this effort of digital literacy. And this notion of digital literacy is also contained in the last European Digital Competencies Framework for Citizens, also known as DigiComt 3.0. So I really think that this is something crucial for the years to come, as well as Oshi was saying, digital security. So as an activist, but also normal people, we all have our names, addresses, networks, everything online. And when states are democratic, this risk, this sharing of information is a risk that is manageable. But when democratic conditions starts to worsen, then we must be sure that these data are protected and they're not going to be used for bad intentions, with bad intentions. So strong guarantees about privacy, data protection, and system securities are needed. And citizens must also be aware of these rights. So I don't know how many people know exactly what the GDPR is about and what exactly it entails to have their data protected and then, also deleted after a certain period of time. But yeah, so digital literacy, digital security, in this way would have more digital inclusion and I think a richer and more interesting deliberation process also online.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to hark back one moment to something that I think was somewhat shared by all three of you. You both of you mentioned design, also in the digital literacy and choice and GDPR thing, is this idea of the choice architecture that is in the digital tools that you are using. So that is not just whether or not a tool is GDPR compliant. It is not just about data privacy. It's not just also about the user experience. So it's not necessarily how easy it is to use a tool, but it's also, for example, about if you have a filtering function, then what does it filter? How transparent is that to the user? Essentially, if you think about the concept of nudging, right? How is the tool that you're using nudging you to bias you, not necessarily on purpose, towards certain opinions? So for example, if I went online on Google and I looked at what is the best way for me to be more climate efficient, and the first thing that I saw was about solar panels, then I'm not sure I would go through all of my options. But why is the first thing that I'm seeing solar panels? It depends on the tool that I'm using and the algorithm that I'm seeing. So this is this concept of choice architecture that I think both of you were also touching on, and I think is super important if we're going to have digital tools to be aware that it exists, at least. I see John.
Oh, just a reaction. I see the problematic aspect in that, right? One other topic I've been passionate about is it's actually the use of some specific types of nudging as a way to engage citizens. And I'm talking of game design, so going back again to design, or gamification as you want. And that the idea there, which I understand is problematic aspects, is that what if we make participatory processes a little more playful in order to have a higher engagement by participants? You see, that is a nudge. It comes with all the problems of behavioral sciences. So all these idea that you are basically forcing people to make some decisions. But I think there is also a positive use. And in a few experiments that have been run by mostly local administrations with the use of small game designed elements, the rate of participants and the response by citizens was a little better. So gamification of participants, yeah. I mean, it's again, I think that it shouldn't be put just as a game for a number of reasons. The main reason is that even the best game after a little while gets boring. However, I believe that by introducing small playful elements, you can have more citizens engaged. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's an illusion to think that we could develop a platform that's neutral, that's not nudging us in any direction. So even if theoretically we would love to have a participatory deliberation platform that's not pushing people to act in certain way, it's just impossible. So then I think if we accept it, we can embrace to use it, but use it very responsibly. And I think it's a really good example what you raised with the games, because what we also see with AI is that AI can help in many things, even in deliberation, even in conflict management, even in finding the most optimal solution in the short term. These studies are really in the short term, few months max. And we have to be critically thinking what it means then in the long term if we rely on gamification for democratic participation. You said there is a good number of reasons. I fully agree. If we rely on AI to find the optimal solution or to smooth out conflicts between humans, what would happen in the long term? Maybe we are okay with it. Maybe we say it's so important that let's just go for it. But we have to distinguish between the short-term gains and how it plays out in the long term and what sort of dependencies it builds for us.
It also raises question of what we want the tools to do for us, right? Like sometimes people tout tools by saying it will be easier to reach consensus with this digital tool that summarizes and looks at all opinions. But is that what we want in a democratic process? Do we want to reach a consensus? Is that really necessary? And do we want it to be done by a tool? I think these are the sorts of questions that like right now is really relevant to see what kind of digital tools we want to use if we want to use them. Paula, I don't know if you want to say anything before we go into audience questions. Fantastic. Thank you. In that case, we are actually very good on time. Thank you so much for being brief and to the point. I appreciate that. So for audience questions, we are going to now open up. If you have a question or a comment, please put up your hand and a microphone will find you. A couple of things to note. Please introduce yourself just so we know who you are. Please also keep it short and to the point. If someone starts going on a monologue, I might cut you off, but that is just for timing. And I think, yes, and I will collect 1 or 2 questions at a time just so our speakers don't get overwhelmed. And if you could direct your question to 1 or 2 of the speakers, just so you know who wants to answer, that would be fantastic. So we're looking for a microphone. You can come up here, Marta, and take mine.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So we have the gentleman in the gray shirt. Thank you.
Sergei Kasyanov, Harvard Aerospace and Defense Alumni Organization. I have a short comment, try to be short. First of all, as an engineer, I'm very hopeful and I believe in digital tools for the democratization and participation of participatory governance. But of course, they should be on the level of transparency, avoiding abuse, avoiding bias, from both internal stakeholders and some external intruders. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I saw a hand over on the side, the red sweater.
My name is Julian Hale. I'm a freelance journalist, communications professional. I've got 3 questions, actually. I've been long in favor of this digital and media literacy in schools at an early age. I just wanted to ask, I know France is one country, I think, that's introducing it. And I wondered if you had any knowledge of evidence of how successful France or any other country are with their efforts, whether there's been improvement. And also for digital democracy projects that are underway or underway already, are there any majorly successful ones that you can point to and why they've been successful? And the third question is about there's a European online hate observatory where I heard someone explain who runs it, how it tracks hate speech online across lots of different social media. I wondered if you had a comment on that and whether that's how effective that's being.
Fantastic. We're going to take those two questions. Keep in mind that you can then afterwards pose your own questions or react to anyone who has said anything. So I turn to my panelists. Would anyone like to take the first reaction?
I can take the first one, but I have to say that on the digital and media literacy programs, I'm not aware, so I don't know if Paula would like to take that one. But on the hate speech online, there is a really interesting experience from the US where they were using AI to track hate speech online. And what they found is that the AI algorithm systematically flagged the discourses by people of color, especially Black people, as hateful speech, even if it was just argot, playful words, very particular expressions of the way they use language. And I think we have to be very conscious that if we observe via AI and we rely on the mainstream language use, we may oversee some expressions, but I think the bigger risk is that there may be groups who just happen to have a different use of language and they would be flagged systematically, even if there is no actual hate behind the message. It's just the words of use and the terms. So I think just a word of caution of automatizing hate speech screening, even though I think it's a very useful initiative.
On that, wait, Gianluca, would you like?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm also not an expert on digital skills. However, I think that's something I share on this topic, because I understand the question was how do we measure the success? What is what are the criteria that we can use? And I think one very important criteria is the time that you can reasonably expect that skill to be applicable in the professional domain. When I graduated at university, I had a reasonable expectation that the skills that I had learned would give me 10 to 15 years of time, and I will still be able to use those skills I graduated in law, so in the legal profession. But with digital skills, the tricky part is not just installing the skills in young individuals, but to keep in schools, in universities, and in the professional domain a constant training to update these skills, the upskilling. So I find the upskilling more challenging than the digital literacy, or this aspect more challenging. About a few examples of success, not surprisingly to me, the most interesting examples are happening at the local level when you have a more proximity between the decision makers and citizens. There's plenty of those. One of my favorite is in Madrid, the platform called Decide Madrid. It's a very interesting case because it's a platform, well, based on the idea that if you are a resident in Madrid, you can propose an idea, other citizens can rate your idea. Yes, we like it if you get the threshold of I think it's 1 or 2% of all the residents, the municipality will discuss the opinion, will not approve it. Why I think it's successful? Because people living in Madrid love it. But if you look at how many proposals made it to an actual municipal law in the first year and a half or 2 years, it was just 2. And so that proves that when you have created a well-designed environment, despite the fact that there were not many proposals that made into local law, the satisfaction was still high among users. Yeah.
And maybe just a point on school programs, because I fully agree that this should be on the school curriculum, and this is an important role of schools to prepare for life as such. But I do think that it's not something that we can fully trust school with, meaning that we should all talk about this, and the kids around you, whether they are 6 or 16, I think it's a responsibility to talk about these topics. And I find that they have surprisingly critical views, and they are surprisingly aware from my own little cohort of people. But they also have very, very black spots, things that they are completely unaware of. So I think if we consider it important, we should also make it a regular habit in our life to talk to the young people around us and ask them what do they think about it, and have a discussion.
Yes, just to build up on this, on the digital skills and whether there are more successful examples. It's a project we are carrying out in ECAS that is called INDEU, Inclusive Digitalization in the EU. It's a SERV program that is running and will be running for 3 years, where we try exactly to understand if there are such successful cases through a crowdsourcing exercise in 6 different EU countries. And at the same time, we're trying to partner up with local organization to advocate for the inclusion also of the digital, the European digital agenda in their activities. So hopefully I will have a more definite answer in when the project will be done. But yeah, that's definitely an interesting point.
Okay, fantastic. We have a question over here.
My name is Marie Cormoyer, and I come from civil society. I would like to ask if we are dependent on the US for the technology, and if we are, how we can solve it if it is a problem. Thank you.
And just to take the floor before, so that you understand why we were asking you to click cards, part of the thing that is happening when you click the card is that there's a tool that analyzes what kind of impressions are given based on the things that the speakers are saying. And from there, we have received a report, essentially, from the tool. So if it is okay, I'm going to give Tim the floor for about, I don't know, 3-4 minutes.
Yep, sure.
So that he can explain this, and then we will go back to our regularly scheduled.
So we would like to show you the statistics. Here are those kind of summary of what you have contributed during the events. So here you see the reflection timeline, which is to collect the number of cards that you flip during the exact moment of the speak. So let's see where we check top one, the top bar, which is, I guess, the cards it needs more clarity, I believe. So let's click. So if you click, then you go back to exact moment of the debate. You see the transcript on the left. So then let's see, what is the point that we need more clarity. So can I say if you click again, click the bar again, so it will blink. Yeah, here. So let's see. So the question I asked myself.
That was Paula's part when she was saying that she's the EU rights coordinator at ICAS, and how the young people then connect to this.
Yep. So maybe we can go back to this later, and I would like to show you the reports. Okay, so which is generated based on the transcripts and also your feedback. So number one is you see the summary, of the debates, and there's some questions that will be very useful for moderations. I'm sure that Berta, you received some questions, and maybe we can give maybe a minute for the for the audience to read a little bit these questions generated by the platform?
Actually, if it's okay, I think, if I may, let's leave this as is up top, because I will get back to this. I can use this in our conversation, and then we can embed this into the conversation. I like the provocative question, so I will spin it off to ask you guys, if that's fine.
Yep, sure.
Fantastic. Sorry. So I know that this is a little bit distracting for our panelists. I'm sorry about that. But the essentially what I'm seeing from this is that with the provocative question, it does touch on something I was thinking about, which is in this discussion, we have started talking about technical aspects. So the choice architecture, do we trust AI? How does it summarize? But we haven't touched so much on these like democratic principles of, does it make sense to focus on the tech if the democracy part is not super stable? So at the moment, I am open to disagreement on this. At the moment, I would argue that in Europe, our democracies are not perfect. And especially at EU level, there are some democratic deficiencies that we could address. So even if we have the best tool in the universe, it is quick, it is useful, it summarizes well, it never hallucinates, it's, you know, everything you ever want it to be. Would it make sense to use it? Is essentially my question. Or should we be focusing our efforts on democratic, really like OG democratic processes and renewal? Which is a difficult question, I understand. We also have the question from our audience member from civil society. Do you want to repeat your question, by the way? I don't know if you guys remember it. Do you?
I wrote it down because I know my limits. Yes. So maybe with yours, because yours is a bit easier. I think if we had a platform, we should absolutely use it. Should we expect to solve all our democratic problems? Absolutely not. But even if it just helps a little bit, but we should be conscious of its limitation. And for tech dependency, yes, absolutely. And we are dependent on US for technologies. And China, of course. But yeah, I think the question was it specifically on US? Okay. Although the biggest softwares, the biggest platforms are coming from the US and from China, more chips and materials and more physical objects that we use. And I think there is a growing reflection on that. We do see a trend where even public organizations start to use open source European tools, but it is a challenge. And the challenge is not that it doesn't exist in Europe, it's just that these solutions are not yet connected, they are not yet streamlined. So it needs a lot more expertise and investment of time to set up a system. So if you just wanted to replace Microsoft in your office, you would need easily 50 to 100 separate softwares to work in a beautifully orchestrated and coordinated way. And if something goes wrong, you would definitely need an expert to sort it out, as opposed to just paying a subscription to Microsoft. But there's a really strong discussion on tech sovereignty, especially related to softwares. And now the political situation with US is really pushing us to question these choices.
Gianluca.
Yeah. Well, I agree on the dependencies. That's pretty straightforward. And we always evoke the idea of Airbus, which was the last time that we Europeans could gather skills, resources, and create a global competitor. Now, that's precisely what Europe is trying to do. Europe is trying to compete and be less dependent, but that will require a strong coordination among all the members. And we all know that there are different political visions that makes this quite challenging. On the provocative question, right? It's very interesting. However, you see, that is exactly what I see as the bias of design. If you compare a democratic process with anything in terms of efficiency, it will always result as less efficient, because democracy, it's a very inefficient way of taking decisions. If I look at efficiency, an autocratic country is much better than any democracy. There's one person taking a decision, there's no opposition, there's no debate, there's implementation, right? So if the idea is by technology, we're going to have more efficient democratic processes, and so shall we avoid to have something more efficient replacing democracy? That, to me, is the wrong way to look at the problem. It's rather using this technology in a way that will make at least a more meaningful debate. So I very much agree with what you said before. We don't necessarily have to look at the output. Maybe being part of a debate, disagreeing with each other, it's already a plus for a democratic product. Now, selling that from a political perspective, it's very hard. I wouldn't like to be in the position of a politician who will have to say, let's have this just in order to see how do we think. That's very hard to me to imagine that kind of political perspective. However, I think that is the real provocation. Can we have that type of political message? Can we have politics who is investing really in the future and not in the very short term, which will bring us again to the efficiency trap?
All right, Paula.
Yes, regarding the provocative question, I agree with you that democracy is really under strain at the moment. Democracy is under pressure. More than in more than 1/3 of member states, the level of respect of the rule of law is decreasing, and most of the member states of the European Union are now classified as medium to high risk when it comes to the respect of rights, which means that we can say less, we're less free, we have less freedom to assembly and to express our opinion freely. And I wish for digital democracy tools not to reproduce the same also inequalities and these problems that we see in the democracy. But for this reason, I feel that the two must go hand in hand. So we must improve our democratic conditions and at the same time use the potential of digital democracy, because it's inevitable. So thinking of sidelining one for the other, for me, it's something that it's impossible. And I think, as Oshi was saying, we cannot replace the face-to-face discussion, the pleasure of doing a nice protest outside maybe the government buildings. But yes, the two needs definitely to go together.
The pleasure of doing a nice protest. Fantastic. Just 1 second, because you've already spoken. So I do want to ask if anyone who has not spoken yet would like to comment, question, give their opinion. Now is the time. Fantastic. We have the person right before Marta over there, and then, yes, please.
Just a quick practical question. I found it very, very nice, this interaction between the audience and the speakers, but I was wondering whether it could backfire if people start staring at their smartphones instead of these speakers. Do you have experience? Is there research about that this is actually useful rather than counterproductive?
I'll actually take this question immediately in case anyone wants to answer. Do you have any experience? I do, but I'm the moderator, so I'm not supposed to speak. May I? Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry, taking my moderator hat off for just a moment. We do have experience with that, and it is an issue. We actually have the opposite problem. So the in-person moment when people are speaking and you see someone in person is so interesting to people that they do not use the tool. So we don't have enough information to actually be able to build up the questions properly. So like a lot of digital tools, the more information you feed into this, probably the better it's going to be. People don't want to click on the cards. They want to pay attention to what's happening. This tool was actually initially made for moments of mass discussion. So imagine you have the American presidential debate, two sides. people are clicking tools, millions of people are clicking tools, and then those questions come in and people who would otherwise never be able to ask questions can somehow contribute to the questions that are being asked in the debate. That's the idea of this. On a smaller scale, immediately it makes it much more difficult to work with. And not to complain, as a moderator, it is also sometimes interesting when you're in the flow of a conversation to be like, oh yes, I have to read the tool and think about how to connect it. And so there is, I think, a lot of polishing that needs to be done in this. Right. Any questions? Any questions? Yes, over here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sorna from Reimagine Europa. So my colleague does work on the project, but I haven't been interacting much with it. But I do work on democracy aspects and, more importantly, disinformation. I had a question concerning how the context and the environment which will receive these kind of tools, because it's very interesting to have this deliberative part from citizens coming and having the technology mixed into it. But do you think that our institutions at the European and national level are ready to receive these kinds of contributions from citizens?
Easy question. Orshi, would you like to start?
Well, I mean, I think theoretically, the answer is an absolute yes. Which organization wouldn't want to know more about citizens' preferences, users' preferences? In practice, I think that's a much more difficult question, because then you have preset political priorities, you have organizational dynamics, agreements and lines to take. I really think it's a wonderful question, but not one that that's easy to answer.
Paula?
I personally believe they are not ready. Receiving so many opinions from so many people is messy, and it can create a lot of confusion. There is already a lot of confusion inside and within the institutions. So I think that sometimes there is a bit of hypocrisy. So institutions, they do say that they're ready to listen to the citizens, but then they don't deliver on this. If you only think about the European Citizen Initiative, which is an amazing initiative, after all the effort of collecting 1 million signatures, and then eventually your proposal arrives in the European Parliament, then this might be discussed. They have no obligation to do so. So this is, I think it's a bit paradoxical, and I don't feel they're truly ready to receive this.
Yeah. Well, may I say that I agree with the other two speakers. If you look at just one-time consultation, a big one, but there's also another possible use, and the word co-creation has been used by, including European Union institutions. And the idea is that you have tiny drops of participation within all the process. So it's not about having all citizens engaged. It's not about having citizens engaged all the time. It's about creating a process with the use of technology in which you can have yourself, myself, anybody interested in a specific part giving a contribution that can be an opinion, can be being part of a scenario planning. And this is probably a more realistic way to answer your question. So to see like the institutions ready to take into their decision making the opinions of the participants.
Maybe I think co-creation is beautiful, and I really wish we had more of that. But what we also need to acknowledge is that there's a moment in co-creation when chaos emerges, multiple view emerges, and as the leader of that process, you sort of lose a bit of the control. You lose control over who is saying what, you lose control over the direction that things go to, and at the end of, if it's a well-constructed process, you do arrive to a meaningful, high-quality output, but there is definitely this moment of chaos when you lose control, and I think that's a very strong reason why co-creation process is not more widely used anywhere.
No, very fair. Like there's the EU Have Your Say platform where the European Commission puts out things that you can also as an individual give your opinion on in consultations. How this is used, complete black box. We don't know. And I'm not even going to start on the MEPs. The MEPs say that they've been voted for, therefore they don't need to interact with citizens. Not every MEP, lots of them. Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question, and after that we will end this panel. So my last question is, if you could have a fourth panelist, who I know was scheduled, but in case you could have one more panelist, who would you like this person to be? Not necessarily a name, but more like a type of person. What is a viewpoint that you think would have been really nice to have in this conversation today?
A tech entrepreneur, for sure. Someone who's having a very good business with technology, because it's very interesting to know the perspective of the business sector, and perhaps disagree with that, but that would have been a very nice panelist.
Yeah, I think it would have been nice to have somebody who has a bit of an opposing provocative view. I think with my dear fellow panelists, we agreed on so many things, which is a lovely sentiment. But sometimes a well-placed provocation, if it's still held in the frame of the discussion, and I think a tech interpreter is a good example, because it could have been very different also in terms of priorities and principles, but maybe somebody slightly provocative.
I agree with you. This people would have arranged the panel. I maybe would have liked seeing also someone from elected institutions, not just the European Parliament, but also someone at the national level, and see how they perceive and what is their relationship, with the public and getting opinion of people. Yeah.
Yeah. That was our fourth panelist, but it's good to know. No, this is also very good for me to know. All right. In that case, you have been a lovely audience. Thank you very much. There is a panel happening at 11:30-ish. So if you would like to stay for that, you are very much free. Please join me in thanking our panelists for their time today.
Hello. Hi again. Maybe some new faces. But I would like to ask you to maybe come forward a little bit. We have some space here, there, so that we feel closer to each other. So let me just again briefly introduce this panel, and then I will just pass the time to my colleagues Tina. So this is a panel on Ukrainian refugees. But then let me first, because there are some new faces, let me introduce the digital tool that we will use during the panel discussion. So this is called democratic reflection. The idea is we want to have, more interactions between the audience and the speakers. So when you listen to the panel, listen to the discussion, you can give us feedback, opinions in real time. So that means when you listen, you hear something that you want to express, use the tool, okay? You can check the QR code, and then there's like a page that you start the experiments, and then there are some questions which are just for the consent form and so on. And then you will go into a page where you see some cards. So I will wait for maybe some seconds, and then we'll move on to the cards. I will explain to you the cards. So if everybody get to the page, and then I will move on. Okay. So there's still some pages before you get to the cards. Okay, remember to click. There's a small starts, experiments, and then some questions for the survey, and then the demo. The demo page. You will see 5 pairs of cards. I can briefly mention of them. Number 1 is I feel hopeful. I feel worried. This is inclusive. This leaves some people out. I agree with this. I see it differently. There are more important priorities. This feel urgent. This makes sense. This needs more clarity. So I just want you to listen to the panel and then to respond to us through the website, okay, through this tool. And then we will show you some statistics and reports that will help us to moderate the panel. Clear? And I want to tell you a bit about the origin of this panel. So in summer, we had Young Thinkers program, which we gather 55 young people. We do have online sessions where we used, some digital tools, to moderate, which is, supported by the Orbis Horizon project. But in short, okay, there was a commentary writing competition, and the winner is Yvonne Kislo-Shushuk. Okay, he is right now here with me. So, we invite him to come to present his policy commentary. So let's welcome Yvonne, and he will give a presentation before we get to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Ivan Kisloshchuk, and I have been working with Ukrainian community in Poland for over 5 years as a journalist and social project coordinator. And today I want to talk to you about the necessity of involving Ukrainian refugees into policy-making processes, whether this concerns their potential return to Ukraine or their long-term integration in the European Union. As the end of temporary protection approaches, the future of Ukrainians in the EU is debated with increasing urgency. Unfortunately, the voices of Ukrainian refugees themselves are often overlooked in these discussions. Furthermore, this topic is frequently instrumentalized in political debates, both in Ukraine and in host countries. Some Ukrainian officials unfairly accused Ukrainians abroad of disloyalty. At the same time, some far-right politicians in host countries often portray Ukrainian refugees as a burden to their welfare system. However, the reality is more complex than political narrative suggests. Ukrainian refugees have integrated into labor market faster than other refugee groups. In addition to that, in countries such as Czechia or Poland, their tax contributions have already exceeded the amount of support they have received from states. In addition to that, over 50% of Ukrainian refugees declare that they want to stay in the European Union in the long term. It creates an opportunity to alleviate labor market shortages and demographic challenges. If current obstacles such as underemployment, sense of temporariness, and discrimination are addressed effectively, the benefits for host countries are likely to grow even further. At the same time, the intention to stay in the EU don't reflect a lack of connection with the motherland. According to surveys, over 90% of Ukrainian refugees follow news about Ukraine at least several times per week, while over 50% are engaged in volunteering or donate money to support Ukraine's resilience. Successful example of diaspora engagement from the past suggests that Ukrainian diaspora may also play a huge role in post-war reconstruction through remittances and investments in local economies. So what should we do to fully realize this potential? One practical step which could be done by the Ukrainian government is to create diaspora advisory councils where citizens abroad may discuss their needs, design of return programs, and their engagement into reconstruction. These councils may meet remotely and mirror the existing model of councils for internally displaced people within Ukraine. Improving consular services, as well as simplifying voting mechanisms abroad are also essential to demonstrate diaspora that it is an integral part of Ukraine's political life. When it comes to the steps which could be done by the EU, we should strengthen refugee-led and diaspora NGOs, as they have been playing a crucial role in the fundraising for Ukrainian resilience, advocacy, and response into refugee crisis. Unfortunately, their capacities are strained by limited funding and bureaucracy. Providing long-term financial support as well as capacity-building activities will allow them to focus on more sustainable solutions instead of ad hoc assistance. Another measure is to amplify local level integration. Unlike many national governments, cities often use more migrant-friendly approaches. It includes campaigns encouraging foreigners to vote in participatory budgeting, targeted grant programs, or migrant advisory councils. These practices should be scaled up and promoted. Let me conclude with one final point. Involving Ukrainian refugees into decision-making, it's important not only for humanitarian reasons or for economic benefits. Research shows that higher level of migrants' political participation correlates with more positive attitude from the host population. It may limit the space for far-right populists to strive on anti-migrant resentment. In addition to that, migrants may act as a bridge through so-called social remittances. Ukrainian diaspora may promote European democratic values back home and support Ukraine in its EU accession pathway. Thus, involving Ukrainian refugees into policymaking, it's not about policy technicalities. It's about strengthening democracies on both sides of EU's external border. Thank you for attention, and I'm looking forward for our discussion.
Have a seat. You're tall, okay? You're tall. So let me now introduce our moderator, Tina. Sure. So Tina is, our research fellow. She's well known, in Brussels. I'm sure that some of you know her and even recognize her on TV. So let's have Tina, and she will introduce our speakers of this today's panel. Thank you.
I think the mic is on. Let's check it. It is on. I hope you can hear me. Thank you, team, for all the organization. We just heard Ivan. Thank you so much, Ivan, for putting this together for the young thinkers. We're very happy to receive it, and we're very happy you traveled all the way here to be with us. And we have really great panel today with us to discuss all the things that Ivan has already raised, but maybe further dive into the discussion because this is really, really a lot to cover. We have a stellar panel with us. We have Sila Wolgi, Policy Officer, Migration Management Coordination Task Force Ukraine, European Commission. May I ask you to take the floor? We can also applaud our panelists. We have with us Angela Moore, Head of Policy and Legal Support Unit, Representation for EU Affairs, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Angela, welcome. We have with us Anastasia Arifieva, clinical psychologist who works with Ukrainian refugees daily basis. Thanks a lot, Anastasia, to be with us. And we have with us Marta Barandi, founding president of Promote Ukraine. Thanks a lot, Marta, for being with us. I hope I can also take my space here. Just a quick note. We advertised the event to have together with us Josephine Lipp, who is head of advocacy, European Council of Refugees and Exiles. Unfortunately, Josephine had a minor issue to take care of her daughter. We wish her daughter a speedy recovery. We go ahead today without her. But so looking at the clock, we have more than an hour and 15 minutes ahead of us. First, I want to run through our stellar panel, what they think about Ivan's presentation and further issues. And then I will definitely turn to you to open up for the Q&A. So stay with us till the end and prepare your questions. We will turn to you. And somewhere along the way, I think Tim will guide us through the democratic reflection. So all the things Tim showed us with the QR code. So keep that in mind, right, Tim? So it's going to be, I think, very, very interesting. Really looking forward to it. Okay, without further ado, let me start with you, Sila. So, I mean, as Ivan referred to it, it's really, what is this TPD? This is an emergency tool, right? EU has never triggered before. It was unprecedented action. But are we still in an emergency mode? Is it temporary?
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Indeed, it was triggered for the first time, and it's a tool that we have. We are talking about the biggest displacement since the Second World War. It was always meant to be temporary, and all the time I talk to Ukrainians, they always mention this, and we also in the policy side, we live a little bit, I mean, they live in a suitcase mode, but this is something that I think describes this situation. At the same time, I think we have evolved from the emergency response. If I may recall, in 2022, we started with at the policy level with this 10-point plan, which has addressed contingency planning, standard operating procedures when it came to dealing with the separated children, monitoring reception capacities. There were many setting up this temporary protection platform to record the registrations. So it was information hubs and transport hubs for the people coming in. So from that response over time, I would say in 23, 22, we have evolved towards integration, inclusion, we like to call it rather. And then we have been faced with issues about housing capacities, issues in education system, absorption of that, and healthcare. There were many issues that we have seen over time. That it's a directive, so it's obviously implemented in a different way across the EU. Our role in the Commission, I work in the. Sorry, I haven't properly introduced myself. I work in the Ukraine task force, and we have a coordination mechanism that brings together policy officers across our Directorate General, dealing with, there are colleagues who deal with integration, the colleagues who deal with the legal aspects, colleagues who deal with the internal security dimensions, and we convene and discuss all topics that are linked to temporary protection. And we also coordinate the so-called solidarity platform, which has had over the past years, we are nearly at 50 events, and we have had many thematic discussions around the issues. Now, I think last year marked a bit of a turning point, a reality check, and it has resulted in the Commission communication on the predictable future for Ukrainians in the EU. It has also resulted in the appointment of a special envoy for Ukrainians in the EU, which is, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's one and only in the EU for, which is not about foreign policy. So I think it marks also the importance of the issue and the weight it carries, and the commitment of the EU on this subject. And then there is obviously where our response is anchored is the Council recommendation on a coordinated transition out of temporary protection. And there we have moved towards, the idea there is to give a more longer term perspective to people, to be able to transition to statuses that are not renewed annually, but are longer term statuses based on employment, studies, family. Unfortunately, we don't have an EU legal basis to create such a status, so it has to be national level. And what we do at the Commission is to coordinate it a bit, to harmonize and discuss with member states where, like what are different directions and showing best practices. Of course, it's up to them to do that.
So I think it's very good to unpack this, because this is a recommendation from the Council. this is not binding. This stays in the hands of the member states, right, to take this forward. They can simply refuse to set it up, or how do you see that?
Look, it's a council recommendation. Normally, when it's a council recommendation, we have debated it what it should look like, because it comes after a commission proposal, and deliberately it's a council recommendation because it gives them a bit more, leverage to themselves. We can say that it's been discussed at several fora, and the preparations are ongoing. Some member states are more prepared, some are less prepared, some are more motivated, some are less, but it's also because of the share of displaced persons in their countries. I think we have taken a pragmatic approach on this. We will see. Of course, it's a lengthy process, but our approach is it's not a non-binary approach. It's not about whether you stay or return. We see it's the displacement issue, and I think this is a change in the narrative. We are not talking about, we never really talked about Ukrainian refugees, because legally speaking, they are not. And it's also because the Ukrainian government was never really in favor of this framing, because they are not escaping Ukraine, they are escaping the war. But we have moved towards seeing this displacement issue not necessarily only in the migration scope, but more in the EU accession framework. So Ukrainians now in the EU, they will be future Europeans. We are building a shared Europe together. What we are doing with our policies now, it does not only affect the displaced population, the 4.5 million people. It will have an effect on Europeans and Ukrainians alike for generations to come. So this is a little bit the framework, and in order to allow people to make informed decisions, now we are moving towards a phase of empowerment where we want them to take informed decisions. It doesn't have to be you stay or, for example, offering longer term perspective, a longer residence permit does not equal not returning to Ukraine. It just gives you the tools to empower yourself, to gain skills, to build a life, because a successful person now in the EU, a Ukrainian person who contributes to the European economy, as you very well pointed out, it's a very strategic asset for Ukraine's recovery. And Ukraine's recovery doesn't start when there is a ceasefire. It's already ongoing.
I think this is very, very key importance here to parallel it with the EU accession. It's just very quick follow-up question, because this is very, very interesting. With the accession, we don't have precise timelines. Obviously, we have some ambitious, let's say, time dates, end of 2028, according to the latest enlargement package, when, if everything goes well and if the country delivers, they should be perhaps ready to finish the negotiations. So to coming back to these transition measures that you mentioned, like how are those timelines looking here? Because they should go in parallel with the accession. We don't know how fast accession will go, again, because of the member state vetoes. So far, I can call that. How the timelines look here?
The timelines are not aligned, and they're not meant to be aligned, in my opinion, but it's not my remit to talk about the accession. I think what we have to do, and we have the legal tools to do that, is to ensure that we avoid a cliff edge moment at the end of 2027. I think at the beginning of the crisis, with all the humanitarian response and etc., but from a policy perspective, from a member state's perspective, people were looked at as asylum caseload. This is why temporary protection was activated, because it would have it would have not been possible to process as many asylum requests. But this has evolved. It's not that perspective anymore. But at the same time, once temporary protection is not in place, then people will need to find either to voluntarily go back to Ukraine or find another legal ground to stay. But it has to be predictable, it has to be gradual, it has to be informed, and it has to be based on empowerment. So at the moment, we know that it's activated until March 2027. We have, and certain countries are putting in place, I'm talking about the most concerned, new legal statuses for people to transition to. And we have safeguards in the Temporary Protection Directive to protect those, mostly the vulnerable cases, who cannot transition to statuses based on employment, for example, but also if Ukraine is not ready to cater for their needs, the right attached to their status is going to be rolled over. So there are certain provisions. I don't know if I answer your question.
Perfectly. I think there will be more follow-up questions from the audience. I'll just stop here. Let me bring in now Angela with us. So let's have this is a very good thing to see what EU has done. This is really for the Union unprecedented. We have some challenges to address, but it will be very good to, compare how has EU acted to the wider scope from the United Nations perspective. How does this compare to perhaps other crisis responses, or what would you see EU to do better, or I don't know, how were your expectations of this directive?
No, I think as has been discussed about the temporary protection directive, it was part of the Common European Asylum System since 2001, but then really activated for the first time in response to Ukraine. So we certainly understood the massive potential pressure that such a large number of people would place on asylum systems, and the fact that there was consensus and all of the receiving states were able to move forward so quickly with giving people access to rights and protection was, from our perspective, enormously positive. Right. I think the other piece of this that we saw as being really positive and protective was that refugees, as they fled from Ukraine, were able to move freely. So we also saw at the same time, we saw legal status paired with freedom of movement, which was something that really reduced the risks that we often see in displacement crises in terms of smuggling, exploitation, and potential trafficking. Because people could move regularly across borders, because they could approach authorities, because they could register themselves, they could receive documentation, they could put their children in school, they could apply for jobs. This was something that really enabled resilience among the community as they were displaced. And from that perspective, I think UNHCR saw it as very, very positive. We do have to contextualize this, as you said, within other responses. And we do see, not in the same exact way, but similar mechanisms and ways of providing protection globally. So I think in this sense, it's a good indication that sometimes we do have these situations of mass influx where people flee in very large numbers, and it's not a moment for really lengthy processes, because we understand why people are fleeing, right? When we have a major event, when we have a conflict, when we have a natural disaster, we know why people are coming. And I think mechanisms like temporary protection, or if we want to take other examples, we can think about countries that have provided prima facie refugee protection. Right. So, for example, years ago, when large numbers of Somalis in 2013 fled to Kenya, they were recognized on a prima facie basis, meaning that they approached, they were able to register, they were all considered refugees. So I think these are good examples of ways to give people access to rights when we see that individualized determinations involving lengthy processes may not be the best way forward, right? So there are definitely mechanisms that can be put in place to ensure that there's proper registration processes followed, that states understand who's on their territory, that they're able to include and ensure access to rights, but in recognition of the practical realities and the exigencies of the situation.
Right. I think this is very, very promising. So that case was a success. What about other challenges perhaps you see there that you could have dealt perhaps better, or you see to be dealing better in the future?
No, I mean, as I think Scilla was mentioning, I think the major challenge in approaching from this perspective is the short timeline, is that it doesn't really give refugees predictability. When they know that their status has to be renewed on a yearly basis, that this makes it very difficult to take decisions about enrolling your children in school, renting an apartment, making longer term plans for your future, because we know the average period of displacement, unfortunately, globally, is getting longer and longer. I think it lands somewhere around 17 years now. If we look to the Syria crisis, right, that started in 2011, 2012. So we see these long periods of displacement during which it really is essential that people be able to live their lives, contribute to their communities, pursue their aspirations and dreams. And this is more difficult when they don't know where they will be in 6 months. So I think the transition from temporary protection, as Scylla was underlining, is really important as a step to say, we recognize that this situation isn't resolved. We recognize that it's not going to be possible for everyone to go back. And we want to give people statuses that give them this predictability and ability to plan their future.
Thank you so much. I think this was a great summary and a great segue to bring in Anastasia, who is a clinical psychologist. And we here talk policies, and that was like a great thing that you could join today with us. It's, I think, great to have insights directly from the refugees because you work with them daily basis. What is it that they want? I mean, Angela mentioned aspirations, dreams, predictability they may need, but what are their main concerns, Ukrainian refugees here? How do you see that even reflected in the policies? But I think let's start first, like understanding what are their main worries, and then we can dive in deeper.
So I guess it's important to remember that we speak about Ukrainian refugees and we speak about the war, but actually for people it's only a part of their life, right? They go on with their lives and the war is just on the background, but they have other plans and they have other life aspirations. And we cannot really generalize and say Ukrainian refugees because depending on the age, they have different concerns. And when young people, let's say people below 25, they usually have a very particular concern because they very quickly become parents to their parents because they speak the language, they learn the language, they have to take responsibility, but generally they catch up quite fast and within 5 years they can be on the level with the local population. Then people who have children, that's something different because it's much harder to integrate if you already have to take care of the child, and also it influences the decision whether you want to go back or whether you want to stay. And it's very hard to combine to understand the language system and the school system and then also try to update your professional qualifications and try to integrate. And then often it also means that there are some relatives who stayed in Ukraine of whom like people of that age have to take care, or let's say spouses who are in the army. And then for people who are around 50, this is a very particular concern of the loss of social status and professional status. It's a very big personal loss that also impacts their decision whether they want to stay or go back and whether they see any future. There is a specific category of women who are 35 plus, do not have children, and then they have to take a decision. Do I now put all my effort into trying to learn the language, get the local job, and give up my idea of starting a family, or do I go back because I have some stability there, even though it's on the context of a bigger war, but at least there I can start a family. So it's very hard to generalize, but if we speak about all the categories, the sense of temporality has been active from the very beginning, right? Because in the beginning, in 2022, mostly everybody thought it's going to last for a few months. And so people did not really make any effort to integrate. And I would say that the best mental health outcomes were of people who were not waiting until they get a response, but actually they said, okay, I'm getting a job, any job. And then they do not have the sense of lost time. And the people who actually wait until they get clarity, then mental health outcomes are way worse because then they feel the sense of lost time. And the longer they wait, and because of, the temporary protection is temporary, but it's also the nature of the conflict. We do not know how long it's going to last. It's not a problem of a particular policy. But then what is now, I think now everybody is more or less aware that next year you need to switch to some other type of permit. Mostly people understand that your chances are higher if you are employed, but then it doesn't necessarily mean that they want to stay in Europe. They actually want to have a choice. They don't want to have to flee because it's very traumatic. They already did it once. They already abandoned everything once to start from scratch. Now, the more they invest, the harder it is to accept that I will actually have to give up everything once again. And then already now, there was already a topic brought up about this experience that Ukrainian refugees get in the EU and how they contribute to future EU accession. Already now, I hear stories of people who, let's say, study architecture or urban planning to be able to reconstruct the country, and they already think in these terms. And mostly there is no choice. Am I remaining Ukrainian or am I trying to integrate into Belgium? But actually both. I will be a Ukrainian in the EU. I will be Ukrainian in Belgium. And also in research, we know that having connection to both identities is better. If you do not assimilate, but you integrate, and connection with diaspora is very important because often your work opportunities come through diaspora, and indeed the sense of connection, because there is also on the background the feeling of guilt of not being there. So I think it's very, to sum up, people are doing their best, but also they're not thinking within their life in terms of war in Ukraine. They think, I have my own plans, I have my own goals, I have my profession. How can that all fit into a bigger background story?
I think this is very good for our understanding, to really understand what these people are struggling with. A few times, I think I just caught this temporarity obviously flagged, but a few times you mentioned quite a few times employment. And I just want to hear on these, Anastasia, because you mentioned, so the more employed they are, the integration and the efforts invested are bigger, so they have better chance to getting the documents, perhaps, we don't know, or even staying here. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit more how does being employed, affects their mental health or integration?
Yeah, obviously it's very good for mental health to be employed, also in the context of war, because the biggest impact of trauma is the feeling of being incapable, of being a victim, of not having control over your life. So the more control you get over your life, the better you are. So it's also not correct to think, this is sometimes I hear, we need to treat people from trauma and then they will go to work. It doesn't happen like this, really. You need to actually gain back the sense of being a capable adult who can take care of themselves financially while you are taking control actively of your life. And then in the bigger framework, feeling this uncertainty, I don't know whether I will have to leave everything and go back. It maintains the sense of victimhood. But employment obviously is a very, very positive factor for mental health and also for integration, independently of whether people want to stay in the EU or go back to Ukraine, because even if they go back to Ukraine, it's better if they go back with skills and knowledge, and then they can foster the integration and accession.
Thank you so much. Far too many reasons to be grateful these days, to live in the peace and the EU and have jobs, to remind ourselves. And the great moment to bring in Marta, because you work with such a big community of the Ukrainians in Brussels, Marta, maybe even beyond. It's, I think, good to hear your perspectives, how these diaspora groups work, how they help perhaps these people to integrate, what challenges you may see currently in Brussels and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting. I've read Ivan's paper and I agree with every word in this paper. We have been dealing with refugees for more than 4 years now. We organized more than 1,000 events with them. So we know that this integration of refugees is important. It happens inside the community, first of all. When they arrived here, they want to meet people like them. But now, after 4 years, I want to give you several examples of how people get on the menu instead of at the table. There are 2 groups of people I will focus on, and they suffer from administrative design of how temporary protection directive is implemented in Belgium. So the first group of people is elderly without assistance. So elderly people who came here to Belgium to their children, so their children who were residents of Belgium, who opened their door to them from the very beginning to simplify the way of how their parents would be hosted in Belgium, because there was lack of apartments, lack of places to live in. So children opened the door to their parents, and from that moment on, Belgium pushed the responsibility of integration, of administration, and of social care onto those children. So the protection, temporary protection for these elderly people only means Card A, only residence permit and nothing more. So this elderly they are excluded from the integration by the administration. They are on their children. There is another group of people, children the youngest one, the babies that were born during the war. In August last year, Belgium adopted a decision, amendments to the law. And with these amendments, it does not recognize children as such needing a protection. So their parents have temporary protection status, children don't. So those who were born after 24th of February 2022. They have to go through migration procedure, and if their parents do not prove that they are capable of sustaining those children, that they don't earn enough, that they have place to live, they have insurance, health insurance, these children after 90 days in the EU deem irregular migrants. They have to leave. They have no child care support, they have no education possibilities and so on. And this issue has been alerted to the Belgian administration, to the ministry, and the ministry says it's right, it's a national law. But this national law is implemented in a wrong way. The Article 15 of the Temporary Protection Directive foresees family unity for those whom war torn apart. Then why should national law torn apart people who have to be united? So this is administrative design that harms people, and that is the biggest problem is that these people don't have advocates, meaning there is no advocacy organization or organizations that would help them. And this is exactly advocacy that puts people at the table. Ivan is right, there are organizations, there should be organizations that take care of refugees, but most of them are working top-down, information top-down, support top-down, and there is no one who would bring those lived experiences from bottom up to decision makers, where would lived experiences translate into decisions, policy decisions. And I believe that in 2027, this all will amplify tremendously. The cliff edge that we heard about, this will result in people losing access to the banking system, to the health insurance, to residence permits, massively. I believe also that Belgium, as other member states, has political responsibility here because of the reverse brain drain, because only the most adaptive one will stay. Those two groups that I talked about, the vulnerable ones, will have to go back. The elderly ones, no family reunification law in Belgium, go back into the war, maybe if the war is not over, into the freezing temperatures in winter. The mothers with children, they are considering already today to leave Belgium because they're exhausted fighting against the system and challenging the system. So they are going to go back. And only those who are able to adapt, who are mobile, young, educated, they're going to stay. Who will benefit? Belgium will benefit. Who will lose? Ukraine will lose. So I believe that Belgium should take this political responsibility and contribute into creation of the platforms, into putting people at the table instead of just coordinating and putting them on the menu. Only then the temporary protection will stop producing injustice and start producing responsibility.
Thank you so much, Marta. This was very, very insightful. I'm not myself an expert on this, but I really want to run this through Sila, because what Marta has referred to, apparently what I could get out of it, is that this Belgian law may come in, kind of a... Sorry, could you hear my question? No. Should I repeat it, Berta? Okay, great. So what I could get from Marta is that Belgian law that was adopted towards these vulnerable people may be breaching the temporary directive, which is the EU directive, which has to be transposed by the member states. So EU law should take the precedent here, as far as I understand. But do we have non-compliance?
I cannot comment on compliance issues, but what we do and what I would suggest for you to do, because we do deal with practical implementation issues, and also we have channels where complaints can be filed that then legal colleagues do their analysis and they look into this. We have seen several potential breaches of TPD. And it's been, how to say, there is an understanding that it's a directive. There's certain margin of maneuver how it is implemented. At the same time, European unity is above all. So the tools that we have, again, for compliance, it's infringement procedure. In the case of Ukraine, it hasn't been used. I leave it at there. At the same time, we do have dialogues, and we do have colleagues on the ground who actually monitor the situation in more of the neighboring countries. But we do have dialogues in member states, and we have, for example, we have several times meetings with the Ukrainian consulates and the directorate of Ukraine that deals with it, and they are flagging these practical implementation issues to us that we can then discuss it with the member state. Like, look, I haven't heard of this, but it indeed sounds very unreasonable to have the babies excluded. So this would be my advice, to flag it to consulate. They have their channels to have it, or to NGOs. We have also regular meetings with civil society, with UN organizations, where we address these issues. And we can address them with the member states. If you're not aware, we cannot do them. And this certainly we are not aware, because I've seen all the issues yesterday. So,
if I may comment on that, yeah, thank you. Thank you for your advice. Yes, we know about the possibility to write a complaint on the Commission's website. The thing is, the issue is very urgent, because the mothers are considering leaving now, and the complaint can take months and months. We know that. The consulars, from my experience, like what refugees are saying, that the consular sections are saying change the country. So that's the advice. Again, about advocacy, you have meeting with the NGOs, that's great. But if these NGOs are not aware, maybe then these people do not feel safe sharing their experience with NGOs, or they are just not reaching those people who suffer from this kind of harm. As for the European Union, like unity, there is Article 4th of the treaty establishing European Union says loyalty. The member states must be loyal to the European law and to the European structure. Besides, I understand that directive leave the margin of appreciations to the states, but there is a fait utile of the law that they must comply with the goal of the final goal of the directive. Besides, also there are some norms in the directive that might have direct effect. Not all of them, of course, but some might. Therefore, of course, we are going to do all the steps. Just I'm afraid that by the time it's done, it's 2027 March, and it's just too late. We have not much time to do that.
Thank you so much, Marta. I think the way we know about the Union and how the Union, we have a treaty, but we have a very long case law that really helps us interpret the EU treaties. And I completely agree with Marta, this takes really years to solve the cases. And before we open up to the Q&A, I really want to bring in Angela, because maybe you can tell us how should the EU go ahead towards those cases, which really take time, and whether there are mechanisms that should be in place.
Sure. I think in this case, we also haven't had this issue raised to us through any of our outreach or NGOs, though I don't cover Belgium specifically. I cover more at the regional level, so I can also check with colleagues to see if they're aware of these cases. But certainly we would also think that there would be, through the European Convention on Human Rights and the right to family unity, a remedy for these sorts of cases that would also perhaps not rely on the TPD as such, but rather this foundational right, which should be something that the courts could use to ensure that there isn't this difference of status between family members, and that there isn't a challenge that would prevent them from receiving protection in the EU.
Thank you very much. I see some of my colleagues who work on the topic in the room. Maybe they can also offer their comments or the questions. But with this, let us open to the Q&A. So raise your hands, and we are happy to hear your questions. I see already one question here. Let's collect a few others. Let's start with you there. Okay, do I have a... It's okay, I can run the mic myself. If you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Hello, my name is Adrian Forsström. I work at a Brussels-based think tank, and my question goes out to all the panelists. And my question would be, which member state or member states have handled the situation the best, in your opinion, regarding Ukrainian refugees? And what can we learn from how they have handled the situation in other states? Thank you.
Be your microphone if you want.
Sure. Do you have time?
Great.
Here.
Yes, I have a question to Tin, because also to the, I introduce myself. I'm Mrs. Barmska and I am a former EU official. I worked at the legal service for 17 years. So my question goes mostly to Tin. Why do you keep saying and lying to the Ukrainians? I have family in Ukraine, by the way. Why are you keeping lying to the Ukrainians that they will integrate the European Union? You know very well that some member states where there is a referendum will never accept because of agriculture. That's my question. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia Sharemok, and thank you so much for such an interesting panel. I'm here on behalf of the Center of Civil Liberties. It is a human rights NGO in Ukraine. And I have a question to Ms. Volki, primarily, but it can also be answered by anyone who has an answer. You mentioned that people will voluntarily go back to Ukraine or find other legal grounds to stay. And based on that, I have a question. What do you envision these legal grounds to be? And will there be any legal grounds specific for Ukrainians? And also, does this mean that if the Ukrainians under temporary protection do not satisfy those grounds, they would not have a legal right to stay in the EU?
I think we can start with those three questions. Sila, do you want to go first, starting with the question on the member states? Or you can pick the other ones as well. Yeah.
I will start with the last one.
Sure, you go ahead.
I think it's a good example that demonstrates how member states are taking different approaches to different issues. And the issue of the legal statuses, and I have mentioned this before, we don't have an EU legal basis to create a new status for Ukrainians in the EU. It is the TP that gives the most harmonized status, but as we know, it's temporary. We don't want it to last because it preempts the instrument as such. It's not providing enough predictability and stability for the people in the status. So what comes after, it's entirely, there are some EU statuses that people can apply to, but how to say, most of the statuses that are available, they are created based on national law. And these statuses are not necessarily created for Ukrainians. They are available for all, as we call them, third country nationals. So this is the general approach. And when we have started discussing this transition with member states, this has been the approach. They didn't want to create a new status, and creating a new status takes a very long time. And there's no appetite for it. When it comes to the national statuses, then there are two approaches, either to offer the same statuses that are available to other third country nationals that are normally a bit restrictive because they have a high threshold, like high salary threshold, or it's linked to employment, etc. That's what I see the problematic with them. Then there are other countries like Poland that created we call it in our jargon the omnibus status, which their objective was to offer a blanket solution. So basically, almost everybody who is eligible to have temporary protection is eligible to have this status, which is an inclusive approach that we welcome. Other member states, they didn't want to go down that route, but it's also because in other countries, it does not necessarily make sense because of the number of people there are. In Poland, we know that this status, it's meant to cover 900,000 people. So that makes sense. I think it has to be, there is no there's no solution that matches all member state realities. And to respond on the best practices, it's a hard question because we have seen different good examples in many countries, and approaches are different, and also you see the results in different time frames. Germany invests more in integration measures before they do in labor market integration, so it comes in a different phase, while in other countries like Poland or in Hungary, it was the emphasis was on labor market integration first, disregarding other pressing needs. When it comes also to education, not in all member states education for children are mandatory. We have advocated for it because we believe that inclusion happens through education. I think Estonia has been a good example, for example, when facilitating the inclusion of children in education. They have produced a lot of resources and networks to support both teachers and students. But it's hard to, I think both member states have their strengths and weaknesses, but maybe you have a better overview.
Would like to add, Angela? Yeah. Sure. No, thanks very much. I would just echo that I think there has been quite a margin of appreciation under the Temporary Protection Directive. So we've seen this also as a bit of a space where states really try different approaches and really implemented programming and found ways to include refugees, I think that developed as good practices over time. I think from our perspective, one of the most important things was really inclusion and ensuring that refugees were able to enroll in social protection systems. So making sure that particularly the most vulnerable were identified very early on, that they were referred to necessary services, that they qualified for assistance if they had disabilities, if they had specific needs, that they were included in assistance. And this gave them the sense of agency that I think we were hearing about that really helped stabilize their situation. I think we also saw a lot of really positive practices emerging from communities where people were hosted in homes. There was a very strong sense, I'm sure many of you remember, during the early stages of the emergency of volunteerism, which isn't a substitute for state action. But I think in a lot of different cases, what we saw was that states found ways to support volunteers, so that state subsidies would go to families who were hosting refugees, so that refugees weren't staying necessarily in big communal shelters, but rather had a place in the community from the very beginning. This would also, I think, be a very positive example to highlight. I think more broadly, finding ways to, I think as Ivan highlighted in his paper as well, ensure both integration and also a connection to Ukraine was something that was really positive and that we also saw across several states. I can give an example in Hungary, where there were community centers set up by Budapest municipality, where Ukrainian refugees could gather. And we saw similar practices, for example, even outside of the EU in Moldova, that really give people ways to connect to their roots, while also making connections in the local community where they find themselves. We saw it as a very positive aspect for children as well in many cases, if they were enrolled in local schools, because I think we share the Commission's emphasis on this as something that really returns normalcy to children, to have them engaged in learning. But also there were examples where some children wanted to still participate in dance groups, extracurricular activities that featured Ukrainian language and traditions. And we saw that also supported. I'm thinking of Hungary because that's where I was in the earliest stage of the emergency, but these examples emerged in other countries as well. The other point I would want to highlight, also drawing from Ivan's paper, is the importance of refugee-led organizations. I think support to refugee-led organizations in this particular emergency really started to become a central aspect of the response. As UNHCR, we supported many, but we also saw governments supporting refugee-led organizations. So, for example, here in Belgium, we saw support to the Umbrella Refugee Committee, which was engaged in working with the government to provide emergency reception to Ukrainian refugees in the early stages of the emergency. So we saw that also as something positive, going through refugees themselves to provide services, because one of the things we recognize is that really it's people with lived experience of forced displacement who often know best what the challenges are, what the priorities are, and can help direct aid to where it's needed most. So we would also underscore that practice as a positive one.
Thank you so much. Anastasia, Marta, do you want to comment on any questions? There is one question that I will still address, but any comments so far?
I guess it's very hard for me to comment on any other country than Belgium because I only work in Belgium. But I can also just share the insights that I hear from people. And of course, this involvement in local families and that many people were hosted by local families, it created immediately social connections with the country that is up to that day still for many people a source of support. And they regularly meet with their host families. Even from some people I hear that they meet once a week and the children really take them as, like a good friend of the family. The problem though that I hear most from Ukrainian refugees right now is not about trauma, it's about labor market integration. Because sometimes it's really amazing how some people who were extremely active, and I'm speaking like heads of HR of multinational companies in Ukraine, cannot integrate into the local labor market in Belgium for various reasons. One of them, for instance, is language learning. And there is an assumption somehow that people should go through a language course and then update their professional skills and then integrate into the market, which works for some, but not for the majority, because often you cannot learn the language until the necessary fluency unless you use it every day and not in a classroom. At the same time, there are some structural reasons that make it very unattractive to go into not a permanent job. And then also integration into the labor market rarely happens like from nothing to a full-time contract, but it often happens through temporary contracts, replacement contracts, project-based work, which is very unattractive on a short term. Yeah, short term it's not attractive, long term it's necessary, but short term not, because particularly for families with dependents, it's just financially not advantageous to do it. Because then they lose a number of other subsidies, like for transport. At the same time, also they cannot practice the language if they do not try any sort of employment, and then people keep stuck being in the loop of trying to get to improve their language and like update the professional qualifications, and they cannot do it. And now for 4 years, and these are people who were extremely active, independent back in Ukraine, and it creates a huge source of loss of identity because also should they go back to Ukraine, the skills are also lost by now.
So the benefits may even outweigh the short-term contract payments. I mean, altogether.
Yeah. Particularly for families with dependents. Yeah, or also it's even if it's financially more advantageous. Still it's risky, right? You can go to a 2 months contract and then it's not a fact that you will go back to benefits immediately. Or let's say, should you lose this employment, or then it's just risky, it's scarier.
Yeah. So apparently we need, there is a need to change a bit of incentives and rework those benefit systems.
You can say so, yeah.
Definitely. Marta, do you want to come in?
Yes. I just want to say in general that this system is expecting people to deal with the problem the system created itself. And now, like the system has never been created for migration, for instance, like for this temporary protected people, but it expects people to go through migration procedures. People will stay here in Europe anyway, whether they have status or not, and we may have a lot of homeless people if we don't do anything today. So we have to alert the states, because it's the states who will lose in the end as well, because the states will have to deal with the problems it doesn't see today or doesn't want to see. So my fear and my request is to everyone who is involved to alert the states and to make sure that now this year is spent making transition norms for Ukrainians. Even the migration law doesn't foresee for them today to stay, like reunification with families or employment or whatever. They have to think forward and make sure this norm are in place.
Sure. Thanks a lot. And there was one more question from you, madam, about me. Yes, you said, I just want to exactly quote you. You said that I was lying, that Ukraine will become the member of the European Union. Did I get it right? What I was saying exactly was that according to the latest enlargement package, which is a document you can refer to, it says that Ukraine, if the things go well, shall finish accession negotiations by the end of 2028. That's exactly what I said. The other thing you may be referring to, perhaps, were the comments by Sila, where Sila was saying that the TPD or all the attempts of reintegrating Ukrainian refugees goes hand in hand with the European accession policy, right? Now, just to go who was lying here is that this is not me, or this is not our panelist Sila, who represents European Commission, but it's the European Union who 2022, with all the member states in it, including the member states, Hungary or the others who may have reservations, have put forward the candidate status for Ukraine. This is the EU document, which is, we can refer to that, where it is clearly stated that Ukraine has European perspective. More than that, Ukraine has a candidate status, and Ukraine is working in the process of the accessions to become the member of the United States. When it comes to the current states, European Union, sorry. When it comes to too much on the Davos, thanks for the correction. And when it comes to the member states' vetoes, as I said already during the intervention, when I was asking a question to Sila, I did mention that there are vetoes from the member states, and I did have my doubts about, speeding up the accession process, particularly for these vetoes, which is, again, this is not my opinion. This is where the process stands, which is the vetoes of the Hungary that we clearly see. This is why the negotiating framework is there, but not a single cluster has been open. And we know clearly this is a veto of Hungary. Hungary has never said that this is agriculture. We don't have this. Perhaps there are other member states who have reservations, and we will see that later. We just have to stick to the, evidence what we have on the topic. But again, this is not me or Sila, but I think this is all the member states, including Hungary, who have given the candidacy to Ukraine and who have also put forward the negotiating framework. The negotiating framework is something that Hungary is also a member of. So unless they want to change the course, maybe, I don't know, these are Hungary or the other member states who hold the vetoes are lying, but definitely not to us.
And I can tell you that France and Poland will never accept.
Sure, maybe you can repeat for the. So you were saying that there are.
Yes, sorry, I said in some countries there is a referendum and sometimes there is not. But I say that France and Poland will never accept Ukraine in the European Union. Sorry to say so, but I mean, you can't keep lying to the Ukrainians all the time, saying, okay, the status at the European Union is so and so. By 2027, it will be like that. Yes, it can be ready. You can work, you can spend your time, you can lose your time a lot, although the time of the officials of the European Union. But as far as I know, Ukraine will never enter into the European Union. You must tell them they will never enter into the European Union.
We take it as your opinion then, because the member states have already, as the things stand by the EU documents, which I already referred, I don't want to repeat, we see that the EU member states have invited Ukraine to become the member. If the process will be longer, we will see that. But yeah, thanks for sharing your opinion with us. And I see Tim in the room who has to run through the exercise of democratic reflection.
Thank you so much. I would like to share with you, some of the, you can say, the analysis or the reports of, of your, feedback to the talk during, the last hour. So we will share with you a kind of quite fancy web page So, you see on the top there is reflection timeline. So you see all the bar charts, they are your response, okay? Your responses, you flip a card, then there will be a record here. So maybe we can check, or maybe on the right, this is more interesting. You see this thick bar, we click, and it will give you the exact moments, where, the speakers speak. So let's see what happened there. So there are lots of responses to the statements that, can you see it? Yep. So it seems that, when, I guess it's Anastasia, right? You mentioned that.
Anastasia.
Yeah, you mentioned that, right? So it seems, to induce quite lots of reactions from the audience. So maybe we can check the reports. So there are some questions that, generated by the tool, by the AI. So based on your responses, based on the transcript, the speakers speak, we have, some questions maybe for the speakers, and maybe the audience can also reflect. So maybe we can look at this, the key questions. The first one, what concrete mechanisms should be established to ensure refugees' voices are systematically included in policy design? So then if you can move on to the other two questions, if refugees are not involved, are policies truly serving their long-term interest? So maybe this is the question for speakers. And Tina, you could continue.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tim. This is all very interesting. Do speakers want to pick up on these reflections? Do you have mic or
yeah, I would like to pick up on the involvement of Ukrainians in shaping the policies and being more involved. And I think it's our task to encourage members to set up policies that empower people to make use of their time in the EU, no matter how long it is. And I think I just wanted to also reflect on what you said about the stance of the Ukrainian government. And in general, we have this policy that, nothing on Ukraine is without Ukraine. So we are in very close contact with the administration. And we have also seen a shift there. I think at the beginning, we couldn't talk about integration because this movement was seen temporary. They wanted to have the people back as soon as possible. And I think this narrative continued for a long time, that we want to have back everybody and as soon as possible. And we know that Ukraine needs its human capital, not only for recovery, but for the functioning of its economy. Even now, there are estimates that if everyone who is now in the EU, the 4.5 million people, go back, Ukraine will still need an additional 4 million people to reconstruct the country in foreign labor force. So the needs are there. I think what has shifted is Ukraine's understanding, and it was in your paper you also mentioned the Ministry of Unity, which had a short-lived life, and we all know why. But it has been integrated with the reshuffle into the Ministry of Social Policy, Family and Unity, and I do see some positives there, because then it brings. The Ministry of Unity was only dealing with Ukrainians abroad, while this returning to Ukraine has to be seen together with internally displacement, with the needs of the people, veterans. It's all linked together. Integration is not about, going from A to B. It has to be supported by complex reintegration frameworks and policies. And I think this is the direction where we are going. They know that they need the people, but they also recognize, and it's also shown in this launch of the Diaspora Alliance for Ukrainians abroad. And they are building a unity network that in countries where there's a unity hub, they will involve grassroots Ukrainian NGOs. That the focus is now not necessarily on physically going back, because we also know that capacities on the ground are very stretched, but to maintain the cultural links, the identity. This is why we have the new multiple citizenship law, for people to leave the door open, to recognize that regardless where you are, you belong to Ukraine, and even from abroad, you can contribute to Ukraine's recovery by investing in yourself, building skills, by sending home remittances. There are so many ways, by linking businesses with the businesses in Ukraine. There are hundreds of ways, and I think this is now, it's an established way of a vision of Ukraine, and I think it's very welcome. When it comes to how we operationalize it, I think there is still a lot of work to do.
Thanks. Maybe to this, I would just add, we have seen indications of, I think, strengthened inclusion. Going back to what I was saying earlier, the fact that people received status right away meant that there wasn't this lengthy period during which people were going through refugee status determination procedures before government officials, municipalities, and the state stepped in and understood that people were on their territory with rights and would have a prospect of staying, right? So I think sometimes this period of kind of determination being shortened meant that people directly were included and were able to access rights at a much earlier stage. One really good example, I think, of municipalities stepping in and hearing the voices of Ukrainian refugees comes from Slovakia, where a network of municipalities took over the humanitarian hubs, the Blue Dot centers, where many refugees had been receiving assistance, counseling, legal aid. The fact that in this case, in Slovakia, municipalities were taking on those responsibilities at an early stage, having direct contact with the communities, enabled them to hear directly from refugees themselves what needs were, where policies weren't sufficient, where there were gaps. And I think this is an important example to show how direct engagement and really being a service provider on the ground creates that kind of feedback loop. Because I think very often in humanitarian crises, we see these responsibilities going to NGOs who do amazing work, going to UN agencies for a period of time. But I think when we see a municipality giving these services directly, then they receive the feedback directly as well. And I think that really creates a closer relationship between the policies that are pursued and the challenges faced by the people who are meant to benefit from them. And I think that's a model that we can think about and think about how to foster a closer connection through something like, I think your highlighting of advisory councils, Ivan, is exactly on point. That's something that we see in Ukraine for IDPs that has been a great way for ensuring that refugee, or in that case, IDP voices are amplified, that they're shaping decision-making, and that they're participating in their communities in an ongoing basis. So I think having similar councils, having similar direct lines to policymakers is something that we really like to see. There is such a model for a refugee body that directly advises a government in Switzerland. So this is something that we've seen starting to really bubble up, is this understanding of, I would say, giving platforms to people with lived experience of forced displacement. And it's always going to be a better way of communicating needs and setting priorities than having this go through an intermediary. So. Yeah.
To myself. Anastasia, Marta, would you like to comment? Yeah, great.
Okay, I will comment. Of course, we need to avoid the paternalizing approach by all means. And it's also because people can achieve much more if they are empowered. So the more they are involved in the decision making, the better it is, the better outcomes there will be. But then also the policies, we cannot really, there are so many possible scenarios and their decisions will depend on so many things like security guarantees. You know, we can speak a lot about the integration and languages and professional skills, but many people do not feel ready to go back to Ukraine ever if there are no security guarantees. And even if there are, I've heard a lot that people say, I will never live in Kyiv, I don't want to go through this nightmare. I can imagine going back to Western Ukraine, but not to the central Ukraine or anywhere close to the neighbor. So it is important, of course, to work with the refugees together on whatever future we want to achieve for Ukraine and for Europe.
Thank you.
I would like to comment on Slovakia municipalities helping refugees. This is great, but this would not work everywhere, especially where political environment doesn't allow, where there are like either far right or the right movements that are pushing refugees away out of the country altogether, whether in their political speeches and in the policy. And therefore, in my opinion, the role of the European Commission is crucial. And I believe it's actually European Commission should encourage and empower the civil society organizations, knowing that this is like direct voice and the civil society organizations can advocate for those people, can Commission hears directly the worry and can take it further with the states. So I believe that this dialogue should be done directly.
Thank you, Marta. Like for 4 minutes, of course, Wasil, I'll bring you in. Just let me check in whether there are any burning questions, the last one in the room. If not, it's indeed the time. Sorry about that. My hands are too mobile, so I unintendedly pushed the buttons up and down. So we had your recommendations given to Ukraine in the paper and given to the EU, and you had all these debates around it. So I really want to check in whether you're reconsidering or you're more assured about recommendations, whether you have even more ideas or anything else you want to share.
Thank you very much for all your comments. It was really nice to hear all your questions or also reflections on my paper. And after our discussion, I still believe that including Ukrainians into policy making is crucial, and that two crucial direction of it. It's civil society organizations and municipalities. And I also want to mention very important topic of hostility, which is growing, which we can see far right movement, especially in Central Europe, is growing, and even in Poland we can see that this initial wave of really enormous solidarity currently is replacing by growing hostility. Of course, there are still many Poles who want to support Ukraine, who are supporting Ukraine, but we can see that the number of hate speech, the number of even attacks on streets is increasing. And what is interesting that in different surveys, people often talk that, yes, of course, the Ukrainians are greedy or Ukrainians are exploit welfare system, but those Ukrainians which I know, they are good, they are employed, they are nice. So my point is that we need to empower civil society organization and empower municipalities to improve the social cohesion, to just make the host community hear the voices of refugees, hear the voices of migrants, and I really believe that it will not only influence policy making, but it also will allow us to improve social cohesion between Ukrainians and host societies.
Thank you so much, Ivan. I think on this note, we can conclude the discussion. Thanks to Ivan, thanks to our stellar panel, thanks to all of you for the great engagement. Tim, would you like to make concluding remarks?
Yeah, thank you so much. And there is one more step, which is for you to give us your opinions of the tool. So then, if you go back to your mobile phone, there's a step which is you have a post event survey. You give us some opinions, give us score. That will help us to improve the tool in the future. Thank you so much. By the way, there's lunch, so then we could finish your survey and then we can go downstairs, for coffee, for lunch. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, all the speakers.